We will just assume it's live. Let's wait for the line. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Chef AJ and Friends. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and today is the first Tuesday of the month, which means it's time for Straight Talk with Dr. Doug Lisle, where he answers questions that you have sent in advance. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Doug Lisle.
All right, AJ, good to see you again.
Same here. And speaking of seeing you, if people want to see you in person, you are one of the presenters at the plant-powered party being produced by Remedy Food in Las Vegas Labor Day weekend. I just want people to know that.
Fantastic. You bet. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, you're not a big Vegas fan in general, right?
Yeah. Yeah, once in a while it's nice to go to Las Vegas just to see it.
But you have enjoyed the times that you've
Oh
spoken.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, even one time you got to play basketball.
That's right. That's right.
And
I think Las Vegas about once a year. That's not a bad idea.
right. Well, maybe we can find a way for you to play basketball again this time if that's
We'll
something.
see.
Okay, so without further ado, we'll jump into the first question. Actually, they're both people named Annie, number one and number two, but different last names. So the first Annie says, my niece and my sister and her niece, her daughter, my niece, so my sister and my niece, were anorexic and seem to have moved beyond that. My 56-year-old brother has overeaten most of his life and has all the diseases that come with being unhealthy and overweight, high blood pressure, diabetes, sleep apnea, etc. And his oldest daughter is morbidly obese, and they're all on medicine, suffer from anxiety, depression. But
Yeah.
my family thinks that I have an eating issue by eating this way. They think I'm too restrictive, and they ask, "Where's your protein?" And I can and do reply to them. They've seen the difference in me reversing my irritable bowel disease. And I get that over and under eating and under over consuming is an issue for most of my family. But what do I say to someone who's suffering from an eating disorder that I am not orthorexic and too restrictive, etc.?
You know, I think that you have to understand that in all probability, these comments that you're getting are actually out of those people's defensiveness. It's probably not their concern. So they probably are effectively feeling like you are looking down on them. So if they even know that you're restrictive, et cetera, it means that you have probably tried to educate them. And as a result, they're now sensitized to that you are effectively probably signaling that you consider your position to be an informationally and behaviorally superior uh, uh, place. So this is straight out of getting along without going along. And the whole idea is that we need to signal to them that we're not looking down. And this is why we use the seam strategy. And we just basically have this attitude of, hey, you could be right. But this does seem to work for me. I don't know, not sure it'd be good for anybody else, but quite frankly, uh, as far as I could tell, this strategy is working well for me right now. And that's how we say it, and we just blow it off. Okay. And we even go so far as say, hey, it's probably not right for everybody. So that's line number 3 of the seam strategy. So if they ask where you get your protein from, we say, I'm not really sure, but my doctors check my protein and it's fine, And my doctor says that what I'm doing protein wise looks like it works just fine for me. And so everything's all right. Like that's how it is. But notice that everything about that just says everything seems to be working for me, but I'm not saying it would work for anybody else. And my doctor says everything's fine, but my doctor doesn't say that I'm in really good health and better than you. In other words, i.e., no implication of superiority. So that's why you're probably getting the pushback and the people are motivated by some reason when they're talking to you and basically pushing a position. It is either out of actual anxiety for you and actual concern, which is rare, and it's almost always out of their own, the threat to their own status. Okay. So if you rewind the tape on the conversations you've had with these people, and we're probably going to find that you have unknowingly, you basically been pushing a position and caused them to be sensitized to have them feel like that you believe that you have superior knowledge and superior execution. In other words, you're more conscientious and more knowledgeable than they are. And so they don't like that. That's insulting to them. And so they're pushing back by hitting you in the one place that they know where to hit you, which is where to get your protein from. Um, that is that's the classic line. So if you've never heard my speech on getting along without going along, it's on my website at esteemdynamics.com, and the free side, the public lectures, and you can listen to that. I forget what version it is that is on there, but it doesn't matter. It's always the same material. But I'm giving it to you now that the fundamental issue is almost always an esteem process, and that it's all at almost any time when we have sensitized people in an esteem dynamic like that, we can walk it back by getting humble and using the right kind of verbiage in order to basically calm them down from a place where they're thinking they're being criticized and that we're looking down on them. Seems to be working for me. Not sure it'd be right for everybody. Probably isn't right for everybody, but yeah, everything looks like it's working out for me at least for now. That's how we talk. Okay. All right. Good.
So
What do we got now?
when somebody that's ostensibly overweight says something to somebody who's slimmer than them, or especially that lost weight, says you're too thin, it's not because they're concerned. It's often because of these esteem processes that
Yes.
they're being defensive because they're correct. That's the same
Without a doubt. Absolutely. Almost every time.
almost every time, unless they're maybe like a medical doctor or something like that.
Then that's probably definitely the case.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, there are some people that, I mean, there's some sort of rare exceptions. There's people. I had a woman once that lost some weight, so she went from 200 to 160, and she actually felt like she was less of a person. You know what I mean? She somehow felt less substantial, and therefore, like people respected her less. She was actually pretty tall, and so she just felt like, she was kind of the boss when she was 200 pounds. And then down at 160, she was getting a little too normal. And obviously, this was an unusual personality. But I never forgot that. It was 25 years ago, and I thought that's amazing that that's what you're thinking. That is not what most people think. So, but that was an individual that felt like looking at me, she just felt like, no, I was too thin. I wasn't substantial enough. You know what I mean? And so it's like, oh well, what can I tell you? What happens when you eat healthfully is you don't always get slender. You might be curvy or you might be a muscular, thick guy, but an awful lot of people get a hell of a lot thinner than almost everybody else. And if that makes us less substantial, oh well, that's what nature actually had intended for us.
Oh, Dr. Goldhammer once had this question, and the way he answered, he said, the person that's telling somebody they're too thin is never as thin as the person they're telling.
Very true.
Yeah. Yeah. You
Yeah.
don't go around to other thin people. Oh, yeah. It's
No,
interesting, the
no.
dynamic. Thank you. So the second Annie says, I haven't increased my veggies significantly in the morning, but my healthy food plan usually goes downhill after that because I let things get in the way of being prepared with food for the week, or I let the stress of my demanding job give me an excuse for higher calorie foods. I have vegan and vegetarian food cafeteria options where I work, but other than the salad bar, they're filled with salt and oil. I can't even go to the cafeteria for salad because then I get all the other food too. So the question is, I guess, how to reward at the end of the stressful day, chips and more chocolate. So I guess her question is, how to get rid of the self-destructive habits and getting fast food in the cafeteria. I often don't have a break for 8 hours or more. I get bored in the office. I want a reward. The demands are constant. 2 to 3 days a week, my boss has to enter a break on my time card because it's so,
Yeah, i.e., the person has not solved the problem. Okay, so and that's fine. It's no surprise that they haven't solved the problem. The problem actually requires a deliberate sort of process by which you figure out how you're going to solve the problem. So, this is sort of the starch conveyor belt has not been established. So what is instead going on is the person is doing something, has got it solved in the morning, but doesn't really have the big starch problem solved for the rest of their day. And so that's fine. Like we can see what's happening is that the energy conservation system is basically in charge of the decisions. And she's just sort of going through the day and making the most convenient, easy decisions that are half-assed. And then we sort of go off the rails. No, that's no shame in this. You simply have not solved the problem. Let me give you an example of a solution to the problem. The Let's suppose that in the morning we had now I'm making this up now, but let's suppose we had inside of our refrigerator we had a some cooking that had been done. So we've got some rice that's already cooked in there and some black beans that are already cooked in there, and we got some lettuce and avocado and tomato and whatever. And so we actually wrap up for ourselves a a big old bean burrito and wrap it up in a flour tortilla, which is perfectly fine. Okay, so we got this big old thing and we put it in some aluminum foil or whatever, maybe not, maybe something else, cellophane. And so we take it to work in a little sack. So now we've got a little pretty sack that's. So now after you're at work and it's quote harried and busy, what do we have with us? We've got a big, juicy rice, beans, avocado, lettuce, tomato, big old wrap. Okay. So now what do we do? Yeah, we microwave it a little bit. Obviously you're not going to microwave that lettuce and tomato too much, but we heat it up. So now we've got a moderately warm rice, beans, lettuce, tomato, avocado burrito. Okay. Now suddenly we're not a free agent out there floating around looking at the greasy shit that's in the cafe. Okay. We've got a way better thing. How long did that take? Not very long, but we got the problem solved. And quite frankly, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think if I use Rosarita vegetarian refried beans, for example, they're tasty enough. I'm not somebody that is not going to avoid things if they've got salt in them. I don't have any problem using salsa. Don't have any problem using that flour tortilla. The These are I don't know. I don't know that I would wrap up in a raw flour tortilla, but I can't. I don't know enough. I don't do it that way when I do my Mexican food at home. But this is basically what they do at Chipotle. So I guess they momentarily sort of cook the flour tortilla, the and then they put everything on. But the point is that you could solve that, okay? Or you could, I don't know, have some pasta that you cook a big old pasta, or you have a big potato and bean and vegetable soup that you put in a big container. But there would be ways for you to solve essentially the starch problem. In other words, where are you going to get a big load of calories based around starches into this day? And if you don't have the problem solved, then you are a unstable agent out there in the world, and pretty soon we're eating the donuts, in the break room. So that's what the problem is. So no shame that the problem hasn't been solved. A lot of times, I've had the problem solved for me. So when I used to work every day in the real world, I would always go to the local Chinese restaurant, and they knew what I was going to have every single day. It was the same rice and vegetable plate, and I would personally put on a little bit of soy sauce on there to just make it a little bit tastier, and then I would have iced tea, and I always have some sugar in my iced tea. I am now aware that my ancestors on the Kalahari would have eaten up to probably around 400 or 500 calories of sugar a day, i.e., in the form of honey. So it doesn't bother my sensibilities at all that I would be using some sugar in my tea. And that's what I would eat. but now the problem is solved. I'm basically eating vegetables and rice every day for lunch, and I did that for years. And so this is the idea. In other words, if what I've said before is if you are looking at a meal and you can't stare at a big pile of wet starch, you can't see a big pile of wet starch staring back at you, you're lost. Like it's got to be there somewhere. Rice, beans, potatoes, pasta. It's got to has something that needs to look like that. Needs to be a large amount in some package that you like. I happen to like, you know, vegetables and rice and a little bit of soy sauce. I happen to like, a big burrito with avocado and rice and beans, etc. These are the kinds of things that I also like a big old soup, but I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't carry that to work. It's too generally maybe not enough calories in it for to make me satisfied. But by some fashion, there would be a major pile of starch in the middle of my day, in addition to what started out in the morning. That's how you're going to do it. And so, try that out. Just try one. I would get so that, like I said, with my Chinese restaurant meal, I would eat that every day. I never got bored of it, but then I've just got a little bit of Alan Goldhammer in me, just enough to make that happen. Then I might change, then when I change locations and I would do it differently because it would be a different option. But, I actually was able to and can eat the very same few starch meals over and over and over again. That's how this is going to go down. But this person doesn't have it solved. They actually have not settled in on something, and so they're doing it half baked, and that's why we're having a problem.
Thank you. But there was another
Um,
restaurant that remembered your order, which is why they said, and a piece of carrot cake.
Ah, there you go. That was great. I love that. I love that place. It was had a vegan wrap that was fantastic. I would tell them they had some kind of sauce that they would put on there that I didn't like. That was kind of rich. I'd say no sauce, and they got used to it, so I didn't put any sauce on there. But just the rice and the vegetables, and I think it had tofu in it. Um, and lettuce. I mean, it was fantastic. And I would eat that almost every day now if I lived near them.
Yeah. I go there
Yeah.
whenever I'm at True North and have lunch with Heather, and I do like the rich sauce. It's a tahini dressing.
There you go. Yeah, I would always, there's things that I do and don't like in the world. And yeah, it was that tahini dressing. Now I didn't like it. So I just can't have it without it. I think the
Nice.
tofu had enough pizzazz in it one way or the other that was good enough for me.
Great. Thank you. So
All right.
this next question is from an avid listener of the Beat Your Genes podcast that is every other Wednesday. A new episode drops on iTunes and other platforms, and you're going to understand why this is anonymous. In a recent Beat Your Genes episode podcast about romantic relationships, you said this quote: "The person is not in love with you. This is not their fault. There's no choice. You have no choice in what it is that you feel." After 20 years of marriage, I find myself falling out of love with my husband and developing strong feelings for another man. I'm torn about what to do. Is there any way to rekindle my feelings for my husband if we have no choice in what it is that we feel? The other man is also married, and the emotional and financial costs of both of us getting divorced seem overwhelming. I'm living with guilt and pain every day, unsure of how to move forward. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, to reiterate, you don't have any choice about how you feel about anything, and you don't have a choice of what you think. Okay, so these are not volitional processes. The all that we can do in this life is if we keep our eyes open and our ears open, we can learn things. And in learning things can alter our calculus about about what's going to be in our best interest, and it can alter the trajectory of our behavior. But we still don't have any choice. So this is a it feels like we have choices, but what we have instead of choices is we have a decision-making apparatus. So our brain makes decisions, and it makes decisions upon the best informational analysis that it can do. So this person is facing, I don't know, I guess it's semantic. We could say a choice, but actually they're facing a decision. And facing a decision process. And that decision process, they are working very hard to try to get the information in order to calculate what's in their best interest. So let's suppose that I could game out a bunch of alternatives here. So alternative number one, well, in my opinion, it's in your best interest um, to just pass on what this seems like an exciting opportunity, which is in fact a big terrible fiasco, and to stay right where you are and live out the rest of your life under the circumstances that you're in, and your relationship with your husband can be rekindled. Okay, I could say that, but the value of that advice would only be consistent with how accurate it is. It would be like, I don't know, a doctor giving you an antibiotic for some raging infection that was going to kill you. It doesn't do any good to get the antibiotic wrong. If he gets it wrong, then you're dead. If he gets it right, then you live. Okay. In other words, whether we accurately assess reality is going to be the critical variable about whether or not we're going to get the outcomes that we seek. So you're not going to rekindle the relationship with your husband. This is all bogus concept. In other words, you don't have a choice about how it is that you feel about that individual. They don't have a choice about how they feel about you. And those dynamics that come about are automated processes as a result of the calculus situation. You don't have a choice. So, so basically, we can tell that whatever that relationship with your husband has been for the last 20 years, if it's been um, let's assume, for example, that there isn't some bitter, contentious process that took place, 13 years ago where everything was great up to then, but then something was said or something was done, and, i.e., we're moving to such and such, and that's it, and I don't care that it takes you away from your family and friends, we're doing it anyway, and you've been bitter ever since. Okay. The Let's assume that there's nothing like that. That in fact, what we have is a situation where for many, many years, this thing from the woman's side of it is just flat as a pancake and not interested. None of that's going to change. So any marriage counselor that wants to work on that is completely delusional. They have no interest or motivation or guts to understand human nature. Human beings have a love instinct. Okay, it's a unusual characteristic in the animal kingdom. So in mammals, there's about 100 species that have it, and there's about 3,900 species that don't. So it's a relatively rare characteristic. The love instinct is a highly specific instinct that is designed for exactly one purpose, and that is to keep the male close to the female after the birth of children, causing him to stick around and be repeatedly interested in that female and provision offspring. Okay. That is the entire purpose of the love instinct in humans. So all the Shakespearean sonnets and beautiful songs from Linda Ronstadt and James Taylor and everything else that, all the Pride and Prejudice movies and books that have been written, and everything that has ever been written about this subject, none of those people that ever had anything to do with it actually understood why this even exists and why it's part of human nature and what its fundamental biological purpose is. Its fundamental biological purpose is extremely narrow, okay? Just like all instincts are. They are narrow, focused with a highly specific outcome. That outcome is the increased statistical probability of offspring surviving. That's it. That is the purpose, okay? So it is almost unheard of in the animal kingdom. It is almost never the case that a male is repeatedly interested in a female over and over again for a long time and sticks around and then licks the heads of offspring. No, this is really out there. And it's actually strange that it exists. In other words, it's very clear that the most effective way to reproduce genes in the competitive matrix of biology is to just have all the females have sex with the males that are the most sexy and outstanding. And all the male does is put all of their energy into that fundamental process of displaying their superiority to other males. That is what you see in horses. That's what you're going to see in water buffalo. That's what you're going to see, I'm sure in giraffes and everything else. And like wherever you see, that's what you see in your neighborhood cats. That's what you see in your neighborhood dogs. That's what you see. What do we have? A completely different system. Okay. So that system is something that has what we call the love instinct. And these are highly specialized, unusual, but not completely unheard of instincts. Human beings have it. Okay. Just like some birds have electromagnetic sensors to help them figure out how to go north, and that you and I don't have that sense. Almost no animals have the love instinct, but we do. What is that love instinct? That is male and female having a pair bond psychology where they have a high degree of feeling of sexual fidelity and an experience of a private universe in and around that arena. Okay, that's what that is. That doesn't stop people from being in love with somebody and wanting to have sex with other people, but it's going to be females typically aren't going to have that very much because a female can only be impregnated one at a time, but a male could, in the course of a weekend, impregnate 5 different females. So the male psychology is flightier than the female psychology in this regard. You will see differences in male and female sexual psychology because of that specific biological fact. However, the male absolutely has the capacity to lock down on one female for either a period of time. Typically in our species, it's not for a super long period of time. In other words, we can clearly tell that it was designed for a highly specific process, which is to lock down for a few years to make sure that the child is of an outstanding female from the standpoint of the male. In other words, it's an outstanding female, or he wouldn't have, quote, fallen in love with her. He's got to feel like this is a really fancy deal for him. When he does, he's willing to stick around for several years in order to increase the statistical likelihood of the survival of the offspring that come as a result. Not 20 years, not 10 years. That is clearly not how the species evolved. It didn't evolve that way because nature could have never imposed such exacting standards on the motivation of humans. It couldn't have said, well, we're 22 years old. Let's keep looking for someone as we peer through an analysis of our mutual personalities and interests and see to it that this is going to be a very low conflictual and very high profitability union that will last for the next 40 years. No way in hell. Okay. Nature could never have been selected for that genetically. That would be actually biologically impossible. What it would have to select for, it is going to be specifically in female psychology to be selecting for a male that looks like he's sufficiently into her that he's likely to stick around for several years. That's what that is. Okay, it's not likely to stick around for 20 years. It's not likely to stick around for 10 years. It's likely to stick around for 5 years. And so the female job is to be selecting the most outstanding candidate that looks like they would be probably to stick around for 5 years. Now, intuitively, to the people subjectively, it's like, oh, that means forever. Well, if you're 24 years old living on the Kalahari, forever may be 5 years. In other words, people are going to be dead. People are dying, so all kinds of people die in the wild, and they die pretty soon. So you can't say, well, this one looks like he'd stick around for 5 years, but I have a feeling that one over there might stick around for 10. Nope, nature didn't do that. Nature couldn't discern the difference between two such individuals. So anyway, this is a long tirade about the following thing, and that is that the love chip wasn't designed for 20 years. It was designed for 5. So it's hardly surprising that people are kind of oftentimes, quote, not in love with their partners after 5 years. It's like unbelievably not surprising. In fact, I would be shocked if it was anything else. And so that's why you will find most serious relationships, after a year, people may be really into each other, and you're looking at their psychology, and it looks like everybody feels like, yeah, I don't see this changing. This feels incredibly solid. It's like, right, you have activated mutually the love instinct. And if we watch you carefully, we're very likely to find that 5 years from now, it's not activated. Okay. So this person is in a situation where the love chip is no longer activated, at least on her part, and therefore it's not going to be reactivated. It would be incredibly financially and socially convenient if it would be. But, nature doesn't care about modern financial conveniences. Nature doesn't care that the most convenient thing for you to do is to eat French fries and cheeseburgers and chocolate shakes. Nature doesn't care. Nature's going to tell you, no, that's inconsistent with your nature, and we're going to make you sick. Okay. So if you try to impose a financially convenient and environmentally and socially convenient thing, like, oh my gosh, then I have to go change my name and go down to the courthouse and then have a divorce and have a lawyer and then split the property. It's like there is no property in nature for any animal. And clearly in humans, there's no such thing. So when 5 years later on the Kalahari, 100,000 years ago, two highly intelligent, verbal, capable, fancy mammals that went through a situation where for 5 years they wanted to mate exclusively and, quote, loved each other. And now it's 5 years later and they don't, they know one of them or both of them no longer want to mate with each other. This is not a tragedy. This is not a crisis. This is nothing. This is just two mammals that don't want to mate anymore. What of it? Okay. But in the modern environment, this has taken on extraordinary importance and fascinating problems. This person is living inside of a problem that is completely and utterly a derivative of an unnatural way that human beings now live. She's saying, well, 20 years later, doesn't love her husband. This guy's married. He would want to be with her. She would want to be with him, but they can't be together because of the enormous, quote, social, financial implications. Right. All the implications that were never there on the Kalahari. Okay. So what do I have to say about this? We've got a difficult road ahead. What do we do whenever we've got a problem like this? We never make a big decision when a small decision will do. Okay. So when people are in circumstances like this, basically I tell them your instincts are telling you that actually for your gene survival probability optimization, you're in the wrong place. Okay. That's why you're unhappy and frustrated and not in love, etc. Those are the shadows of forgotten ancestors trying to tell you what to do. Okay. And they're telling you leave and shack up with the new guy that's exciting. Are they right? Not by no means necessarily right. You now live, they would be right in a world where we didn't have finances and marriages and, invested in laws and a child that would have to be dealing with a, situation possibly or a group of children. In other words, who the heck knows what all of the features are? There are many practical considerations that would be involved. But what would we do? We would have the person go in one toenail at a time. Okay. So that's how we would do that. And one toenail in a time doesn't mean a wild weekend in Las Vegas with this person that you want to be with. No, no, no. That's jumping in, neck deep. No, that isn't what I mean. I mean literally one toenail at a time. In other words, far better to have some conversation with that individual, by Zoom, for example, and after we have, 15 such conversations with that individual that are 2 hours long, the truth is we may discover some conflicts of interest and some issues about personalities that we don't like so much. Okay. And that may tone that down. Or we may find that, oh my God, this is insane. I just feel like this is the person for me. And what the hell am I doing? Oops. Oops. I am lost. Did I get kicked off?
No, I see you, Dr. Lisle. I see you
Okay.
and I hear you.
Okay, that's good.
Okay.
So anyway, my camera's gone, but that's fine. The so anyway, So the point of it all is that the notion is, one baby step at a time, as as painlessly and as inexpensively we explore what our instincts are telling us. And that's how it is that I would do anything. And we find out where that process goes. If it gets us in a little deeper and we get ankle deep, then fine. Then you may actually want to draw in people like myself who are experts at attempting to negotiate decision-making conflicts like this, so that we look at all angles of this. I wouldn't go to any conventional marriage counselor. Those people are terrified of reality. And the only scoreboard they know is, if we keep people together, I can never be sued and never be criticized. Okay. But you can also make sure, damn sure, that people never seize any opportunity to improve their happiness as well, by having the guts to make a decision that is clearly being called for. So I do have that kind of guts. I am not a cowboy. I don't have anybody rush into anything. Um, and these are, unfortunately, decisions of far greater magnitude than they should be. In other words, like I said, if we were on the Kalahari today, these would not be big decisions. They would be notable decisions and important decisions, but we never would have been in some relationship for 10 years that was non-romantic and not exciting and kind of moderately unhappy. We never would have been there anyway for the last 10 years. When those two highly intelligent, verbal, capable mammals, somebody didn't want to participate and wasn't that into it, they'd be out of there. Okay. They're not sticking together, quote, for the sake of the kids until the kids graduate high school or graduate from college or wait till they're out of grad school, or no such thing. Okay. No way. There's no such rites of passage on the Kalahari. You don't have to put up with that on the Kalahari. You do today. In other words, people do today for the highly responsible reasons of, gee, I don't want my kid having to live with a stigma or go through the process of divorce. Heck, he's 13 years old. He's just starting high school or whatever the heck it is. All of these completely legitimate, practical considerations that weigh in on people and are basically putting them, they're in unnatural stressors, and they are puzzled and disturbed about what to do because they're in conflict between their instincts on the one hand and their practical calculus of a modern disturbed environment. It is not unlike people that are basically eating shitty food but feeling unhealthy. If you are in a long-term marriage that you don't really want to be there, you're eating shitty food but you're feeling unhealthy. Okay, but you don't want to not do it. Okay, so anyway, it's not an exact analogy, but there's pieces of this. It's all about the problem of unnatural circumstances that we impose on humans. And when we do that, we wind up with confused nervous systems and a lot of problems. Okay, so yeah, this doesn't mean that everybody should tell their mother or their wife or their husband goodbye and see you later, but it does mean that we would be fools and gutless not to honor the shadows of forgotten ancestors that are sometimes telling people, wow, you're missing out on the only life that you've got, and you're missing out on the major possible source of improving your happiness that you would have. It's going to require you to run the gauntlet of some public censure and maybe some financial uncertainty or uncomfortable processes. But we know that this benefits many, many people greatly to exit relationships that from practical purposes would seem unthinkable and irresponsible. So I am a person who's willing to walk a person through that line of thinking, and to try to come up with, as ingeniously as possible, the smallest and least expensive possible experiments to tell us whether we are headed the right direction, and to just make one tiny, tiny little decision at a time, until such time when the decision becomes obvious, whatever that decision is.
That was great, Dr. Lisle. Is that where Thoreau got the quote, most people live lives of quiet desperation?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I wonder if her decision would be different if she was facing a cancer diagnosis.
Yeah. In other words, that's the context of everybody's life, matters. It matters, if you have children, how many, what their circumstances are. It matters about whether you can make your own living and how important that is to you about what socioeconomic status. In other words, all of these things are, it matters about how you feel about your spouse. You may not be in love with them, but you may love them as a person and know that they would be devastated or infer that they would be. There are so many considerations here. These are great burdens that are put on people in the modern environment that are not burdens that they were designed to have to deal with. And we sort of consider it to be like, oh no, that's just how life is. And it's like, yeah, that's how life is, but that's not how life was supposed to be.
Well, the marriage vows say, for better, for worse, in sickness and health, rich for poor, till death do us part.
That's right. That's what they say. And there's reasons for that, but those are totally and completely unnatural to our species and any species. So there are reasons for that, and the reasons for that go down into private property that only came about and on Earth about 10,000 years ago under the agricultural revolution. So prior to that, there was no private property, so you didn't have to worry about inheritance law, your kids getting ahead or behind relative to other competitors because of the property that they inherit or don't inherit. When you have inheritance, you stack the deck in favor of trying to create a thing called marriage in order to actually track down whose genes are whose and who gets what property. That never happens in a Stone Age environment because there is no property. So this is we are living under the social evolution of marriage is an unnatural phenomenon that basically puts pressure on, as I call them, two highly intelligent, articulate, self-expressive, and communicative animals who may not want to mate with each other, but for some reason they have to still stay in this thing. It's like, obviously, this is ridiculous. Okay. This does not happen anywhere else in nature. Why would it? Okay. It only happens in humans for the same reasons that people are obese and have type 2 diabetes. They're living in unnatural circumstances and they're having an unnatural pathology in their lives.
This could almost apply to anything why people stay in jobs they don't like because they're afraid if they, because yeah, you can't really say to your boss, look, I really hate working here. Let me try this other job for 3 months. If it doesn't work out, I'll come back.
Totally. This is why people protest and riot. In other words, hey, they've got a hell of a lot more than we do. Okay. In other words, what's that about? And the answer is that never happens in human natural sociology because people are not in significantly different circumstances where one person's making 1 million a year and another person's making 2,000 a year. That's impossible. Okay. So the socioeconomic circumstances of every individual in human nature are basically identical. Okay, so there isn't anything that looks like that. So when you actually look at this, I mean, obviously we're way better off under modern circumstances. I wouldn't even be alive. In other words, I would have been dead 4 times by now if it hadn't been for modern. I would have been eaten by some predator or beaten to death by some big strong man that was going to steal my lunch money. Who knows what would happen? But the bottom line is we live under a super benign environment where people get to live a long time under very very benign conditions. So I'm not wanting to trade it for being a Bushman of the Kalahari. However, it is extraordinary when we go side by side as the most common problems that humans have, and both psychologically and physically. We go side by side and we look at those problems. We see, wow, not on the Kalahari, not on the Kalahari, not on the Kalahari, not on the Kalahari, not on the Kalahari. It's like, wow, civilization has given us phenomenal benefits, but it's also come with major, poorly understood and poorly recognized costs. Okay. And so that's one of, as I'm slapping at the concept of marriage counseling, and it's not that all marriage counseling is useless, but it's mostly damaging and destructive. Okay. So most of the time, marriage counseling consists of one person who's being dumped, marching the other person under the guise of moral righteousness into a marriage therapist's office, who's a person who's terrified of marriage dissolution. Because, this is, we keep score. We call it failure if people don't stay together. And it's a win for the therapist when they stay together. And we basically bully the person who wants to leave out of leaving. That's a success. Wow. That is that field. Okay. And so and this is all a bunch of ignorant counselors that don't understand the species that they're looking at. They have no idea what a human is. Okay. They just know what the current social rules are and what it means to be a good little citizen here and do what you're supposed to be doing. Okay. But they're wrong. Okay. The correct way to look at a human being, this is just like, John McDougall laying it out about how people, to like, how should we be eating? This is called Will Esselstyn. This is how you should be eating to reverse heart disease. The the um the truth of the matter is we weren't designed to be under the circumstances that you're under. Okay, that doesn't mean we can't be under them. I don't have to go out and dig my potatoes out of the ground on the Kalahari. I can just go to the grocery store, but I've got choices there and circumstances and consequences, etc. So this is problems like this question. This is a great question. It's a deep one, and it's one with great angst. And so the solution is not simple. It's not so simple as, oh, well, go with your instincts and just run around in a grass skirt and do whatever the hell it is that you want. It's like, no, there are real live practical considerations and consequences for this. This reminds me of ecologists, failing miserably in their ability to actually try to manage ecologies. And they've learned over and over again, wow, be careful. Like, we might want to do that to help that situation, but when we do that, there's unintended consequences over here, and then there's unintended consequences over there. And we're going to come back 30 years from now, and all hell would have broken loose because we started there. We would have been better off just leaving that alone. Okay? So the wisdom is the process of understanding the difference between your, going with your instincts and not. Okay? And this is tricky business. And it is, sometimes your instincts are, can we know when we should go with our instincts and when we shouldn't go with the instincts? The answer to that is not entirely, but you can become better at it over time, seeing where your instincts may be misleading you. In other words, seeing your instincts are telling you, keep snorting some more cocaine. Okay, and it's like, no, your instincts are telling you wrong. Keep eating chocolate shakes. Your instincts are telling you wrong. Okay. Are your instincts always wrong? No, they're not always wrong. Sometimes they're right. Okay. It's like, no, I don't think you should trust that guy. It's like, well, everybody says you should. Yeah. Well, it turns out you then went with what everybody said, and then you trusted him, and then you got burned. Yeah. Should have gone with my instincts. Okay. So these are complicated and interesting and subtle problems. But hopefully this discussion is, potentially enlightening for people. It can be scary to actually learn about the truth of human nature and learn a little more deeply about it and find out. I mean, I've talked to many people, very bright people, knowledgeable people, people with wisdom, and people that have enough age on their backs to have looked at a lot of life. And oftentimes mm, their jaded view of life is understandable to me, but is deeply disturbing. In other words, the jaded view of life is, well, isn't this just what we have to do? And the answer is no, it isn't what you had to do. There were, in fact, alternative pathways. And for many people, those alternative pathways would have been worth exploring in situations like this. Okay. So, anyway, trying to learn about what the right path is for you, that's some pretty subtle stuff. And we must come back to the principle of we're not knowledgeable enough to know early what the right thing is to do, but we may become more knowledgeable with tiny little bits of accumulations of information. We may be able to determine what is the most reasonable path for us forward.
Right. And it's possible that our ancestors didn't have to deal with a lot of this because they didn't live long enough. And also people of certain religions, they put these ideas out of their mind.
No, they don't.
I
They
mean,
never put the ideas out of their mind because the ideas are instinctual. Okay. They are intimidated by the social censure to the point where the cost benefit is impossible. Okay, so they literally cannot afford to be kicked out of the tribe, to be, kicked out of the trading arena, to kicked out of all insurance policies. In other words, there's such a tremendous potential price to be crossing the mores of the tribe that they're like, forget it. Okay, that's a hell of a way to live. It's a very, very unfortunate way to live. So, and it is an unnecessary way to live. We don't have to be in this box. Human beings are in there, but they actually don't have to be in there. But in order for some people to get out of the box, they lack the necessary disagreeable characteristics in order to actually buck what is often an archaic and essentially damaging set of social circumstances. So but that's changing. You know, that means the circumstances for example, for divorce in the West have changed substantially in the last 75 years. So, in 1943 or no, 1947, if you were a young mom with a kid or two, and you had a man that works at a coal mine, and you're a stay-at-home mom, and your guy's making $2 an hour, you are under pretty brutal financial circumstances that it may be untenable to leave, even though you may be very unhappy. Okay, like literally the lives of your children or their ability to thrive in any way. It's like, no, just gonna have to choke this down for a long time. That's unfortunate. That would never happen on the Kalahari. Okay, so that's not part of human nature, but in her circumstances back at that point, and for many people in the world today, those are their circumstances. But no longer in America. So not at that level. So not everybody can do this, but a high percentage of women can now that the economy is much more about IQ rather than about brawn. So if you've got the brains to make a living and there's a reasonable deal to be made, you can live. You may not live at as high a circumstances as you do at the economies of scale of all the family under one roof. You have to have two roofs, but you can do it. And a lot of people can do it. And therefore, that is the reason for the increase in divorce rates. People say, oh, it's the fall of the church or the people of the societies becoming unraveled. No, it's not. People are being able to exercise more choice. It's really sexual choice is what's being exercised here. And that they're basically like, no, this is not where I want to be. This is not who I want my intimate partner to be. I thought it was, but we had a love chip go off 5 years ago, or we had go off 2 years ago, and it turns out it was a false alarm. Of course. It's also important for people to understand that the love chip will have many false alarms. It's if you're digging for gold, you better have a device that gives off false alarms. It better not only go off under unbelievably pure circumstances. No, because you're going to miss too many. You have to have two types of mistakes. You can basically go off all the time, and then you're digging off the ground up and with no success at all. Or it only goes off when you hit the biggest mother lode, of the century, at which point you missed a fortune all over the ground because you weren't actually active enough. The gold mining mechanism inside of humans, the love chip, is going to go off, and it's going to go off under circumstances where it's not going to continue. It will be mistaken, and it will be mistaken most of the time. Okay? In other words, 4 out of 5 or 9 out of 10 times that a human being thinks that they're in a great long-term love relationship, they're not. Okay? That's not that nature's made a fool of man. That's just the design of the system. It's designed for you to look very, very, it's like a job posting that looks really good. Hey, I think I want to apply for that. Okay. That's how that works. But it's no surprise at all that even when it works, it's time limited. That's how it evolved and that's how it works. So yeah, that's a heck of a question that came from this questioner. But the but the answer to it is, we want to be respectful of everybody's individual situation, including their own psychology about their social realities and economic realities that surround them. These are very important and comprehensive questions, and everybody lives in a somewhat different space with respect to that. But the answer of are we both supposed to stick it out and then try to figure out how to rekindle something? This is the pipe dream and the gutless direction of typical marital therapy, marital counseling therapy. No, that is one possibility that we would examine, certainly because it's the cheapest and easiest pathway, but it's also the one that is most likely to be a dead end. So instead, we're going to look at that person's life, from all different angles and try to figure out what do we think would be the best path forward to optimize their happiness. We're not sure where that road goes, but I only explore it one little inch at a time.
Wow, Dr. Lisle, that was really fabulous. Thank you.
You bet.
We have 3 more questions, so I can ask as many or as few as you like.
We're gonna go for one.
Okay, so I'll ask them in the order they were submitted. And this is from Carrie, and you've already talked about the idea of the Kalahari. So she's saying, I've heard you mention the concept of the vegan bushman and adding slightly higher calorically dense foods to our diet to keep us on track and not breaking, and then indulging in junk food. For those of us that have thicker genes, as in we were on the heavier side during our formative years, how do we find the right balance to keep us consistently losing weight?
That's a fantastic question. And so, um, we could probably do half an hour on that, but I'm going to give it to this very intelligent listener kind of quickly. And that is that from what I have read, the average American's calorie density of their diet is 850 calories a pound. Let me begin by reiterating something that I've said before, but to the best of my knowledge and to the best of the knowledge of modern science, despite anything else that you've read, it appears that there are exactly 2 variables in the equation with respect to weight issues. Number one is going to be natural genetic variation, which you can't do anything about. The second is going to be calorie density. Anything else is irrelevant. Anybody that says protein versus carbohydrate versus fat versus, processing of food, this is all bogus. It's got exactly one issue, and that issue is calorie density. That is the only variable that it winds up being the Gordian knot of the entire problem. There are many people all over the landscape that are highly motivated to keep everybody confused, or they themselves don't know. They're always looking for some trick or some secret that's going to be the thing, but they're all wrong. It's going to turn out that in animals and humans, it's calorie density, calorie density, calorie density, calorie density, all the way down. So I wrote that 20 years ago, and it turns out that 20 years later, all of the evidence supports the original hypothesis. There was a reason for that original hypothesis, which is basically the deep evolutionary biology of energy processes would make sense that would be the variable that nature would be built around. So it's calorie density. So the average American that's substantially overweight, given their average genetics, is if the average person is overweight, then it can tell you that the average diet is too high in calorie density for the species. And that diet is 850 calories a pound on average. I have to tell you, I see people that are eating 1,200 calories a pound diets. I walk into, a Togo's to get my sandwich, and I see what people are eating, and it's like, good God, those people are eating 1,200 calories a pound. So The the Bushmen of the Kalahari eat 850, and none of them are overweight. The they're not overly thin either, so they're just they're fine. Their weight fluctuates 2 pounds in the seasons. When it gets a little richer, they fatten up a couple of pounds, and when it gets a little leaner, they lose a couple of pounds. That's it. That's the natural variation of the weight of a human based around their own specific individual genotype. The if you so but the important thing is the difference between a chubby American and a Bushman of the Kalahari is 850 to 680. It's not that much. This is a super important lesson. Okay. Oftentimes when we're trying to eat a super lean diet, a Goldhammer diet, a McDougall maximum weight loss diet, etc., those diets a lot of times are down at 400 calories a pound. You can eat those diets and they're extremely healthy diets. They're also diets that would promote a very rapid weight loss. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's the fastest way to sort of return to an optimum function physically. So there's nothing in the world wrong with that. But it's also not necessary to eat a diet like that in order to get us down to optimum weight. So here we have the weight that people are eating. Here's what they can eat, and they can sustain that on high volume, low calorie density vegan diets. Those are A+ diets as far as I'm concerned when it comes to health and also the speed. And I think that John, for example, knew that people get frustrated because they're losing weight too slowly, and so does Alan. And it's like, okay, well, eat this diet, and you can. And if you're substantially overweight, it's pretty damn satisfying because the body's just dying to basically dump a bunch of excess weight off of it. However, the truth is that's where you're built. You're built for somewhere in the middle. Okay. And so this is where I live. Okay. That's what I call the vegan Bushman. And so the question of this person is, what if I'm kind of a thick genotype? How, what can I get away with? And the answer is, well, impossible to know. But what we do know is that if you're here and you go here, you're going to lose weight. We just don't know how much. And then if you're here, if you're still overweight here, and then we know, and people say, well, I don't know, I have a set point at 207. It's like, you don't have a set point at 207. You have behavior that is stable, that is keeping you at 207. You were here at 240, you crashed down to 207 and you stopped, and you're like, well, it must be my biological set point. It's nothing of the kind. You're probably at 720 calories a pound. If I take you to 700, you're probably going to go to 197. Okay. If I take you to 680, you're probably going to go down to 182. In other words, and maybe that's too thick for you, and maybe you're too thick at 680. Why? Maybe you have kind of a relatively thick genotype, at which point you're going to need to go to 640, but you're not going to need to go to 400. Okay. So the lesson here from this data is that the difference between success and failure at a lot of times the levels that people are aiming at is more subtle than you think, and it's also going to be slower than you think. So the AJ has a thick genotype. You look at her now and you're saying, oh no, we know Chef AJ is this really thin lady. But it's like, no, that's a thick genotype. That's a genotype that was 185 or 190 pounds or something, and not eating crap, just eating a vegan diet that was on the rich side. And so when she went down to very low calorie density, super lean diet, it was quicker earlier, but then it lollygagged around, I don't know, from 140 pounds down. It was probably, I don't know, a pound a month or so, not that fast. And so the question is that how would I know? And the answer is, well, you have to basically do the following. You have to make a decided change in the calorie density of your diet, i.e., I'm not going to eat nuts anymore. That's out. Okay. Or I'm not going to do this anymore. So I'm going to make a change, and I'm going to substitute a lower calorie density food for one of the higher calorie density foods that I'm eating. And I'm going to sit right there for the next, 60 or 90 days and see what happens. So that's how we would do it. So you might say, that, by the way, most people don't have that kind of patience. They're like, well, if I'm not losing weight, I'm going to crash it down here. Fine, that's fine. You could do that, but you also might not sustain it because a lot of people don't have the self-discipline to do that. That takes extraordinary self-discipline to sit down here at 400 calories a pound. So I have people aim at about 650, vaguely. So what do? Very little, not, I say, don't ever eat a dried carbohydrate unless you're eating a wet carbohydrate, i.e., burritos and tostadas. That's the dried carbohydrates, okay? Otherwise, no bread, no crackers, no cookies, no chips, no popcorn. It's out because those are unprotected dried carbohydrates. They're all 1,600 calories a pound if there's no oil in them. And, our ancestors weren't eating much food that looked anything like that. So that's out. All nuts and seeds are out. I don't care what any doc says. They're not useful for your health. They're just another plant food. They're no better or worse than rhubarb or blueberries or kale or carrots. It's all the same. It's all a bunch of clones. Okay. So therefore the idea is that we're getting, if you've got a weight problem, we're getting rid of all the nuts and seeds. We're getting rid of almost all of the dried carbohydrate. Okay. So that's what we're doing. And concentrated sugars, minimal. In other words, if you're going to use something like honey, a vegan wouldn't use, but they might use dates, something like that, or some way to get some concentrated sugar down then. Okay, that's fine, but not too much of it. We keep that limited. And then what are we building the diet around? We're building it around, I would be building it around obviously rice, beans, potatoes, oatmeal, some whole wheat spaghetti, and so some avocado, and some tofu, and obviously all the fruits and vegetables, etc. This is kind of a mid-level diet, richer than the 400 calorie a pound, but a long ways from anything else. In other words, so it's down here. That's where I would sit for a while. And that diet I would consider a 600 to 700 calorie a pound diet. Probably if I was thicker, I'd aim it closer at 6. That diet I would consider innocent until proven guilty. So let's suppose you're 184 pounds and 5'6", and you're mad about it, okay? And you can't seem to keep yourself on track because you go low and you lose weight, but then you crash and burn with richer food. So there's too much turbulence in the system. So now we aim at this mid-level. But when people aim at the mid-level and they do it for 3 weeks and they're looking at the scale like, well, it's not working. It's like, well, I never said it was going to be that discernible that fast. 3 months later, let's see if you're 187. You might be 184. Okay. That might be the typical thing on your scale. I'd say, good. That's fine. It's working. You're losing weight. You're giving up 100 calories a day, and you're like, yeah, it's not even that hard, but I feel like I'm not losing that much weight. Well, we don't know. Do it another 3 months. Oh, now we're 181. We're 6 months in. You're like, gee, it seems too long. It's like, nah, AJ took 27 months. Let's take some time. Another year goes by, and now we're not 181, we're 169. It's like, hey, we're not having any stress at all. It's like, it's working. Okay, so in other words, until we hit an equilibrium that sits, you might say, well, gosh, that's a long time to wait. That's 18 months. I started at 187. I'm only, 169. It's like, that's fantastic. We've taken off, 2.5 gallons of fat, and we haven't done it under an intense proposition of a tremendous challenge to self-discipline to try to eat a super lean diet. We've basically done something that's very sustainable, but you've got to be patient. Okay. And so that's how I look at this thing. So it's a great question, but the math matters. In other words, we have to understand the math that we're up against and what we're trying to accomplish. The math is recognizing the truth about biology. So there is a calorie density that is not intolerable at all, that would take you down to a very good condition, very good biological condition. There is, okay? But the differences between what could cause you to be too heavy and what could cause you to be in great shape can be narrower than you think. And that is what I have learned from looking at this data. You might not really appreciate the difference between 700 calories a pound and 600 calories a pound you may feel like those look basically identical, but the difference would be 1 ounce of nuts. That would do it. 1 ounce of nuts in that diet would be the difference, could push you from 600 to 700 calories a pound. And at 700 calories a pound, you are 166, and at 600 calories a pound, you're 152 over the course of a year and a half. So that could be the difference. So the lesson here is that the math can be far more subtle than people appreciate. It takes time for that to basically reveal itself. So what I do is I look at the vegan Bushman and say, let's aim at basically 6.5. Let's aim there and be intelligent about it and sit right there and not get self-indulgent, and give yourself 3 months to find out what direction that scale's going. Okay. If it looks like it's going down a little bit, there's no reason to change strategy. Okay. If it looks like it's completely stable in 3 months, then we're overweight, then it's not tight enough, and we're going to need to go down to 600. So as AJ has said, you want it to be as restrictive as necessary, but as basically permissive as possible. It is that balance, and that's the balance that we're seeking, and that's how we would go about it and what that would look like.
Yeah, thank you. I thought that was a great question and a great answer. And I think until people are willing to run an experiment and like take out the nuts, because everybody's afraid because of what some of the other doctors say that they got to have 1 to 2 ounces of nuts a day, they won't understand this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can put on weight so easily if I add a lot of nuts back in. It's like it's that easy. How did the Bushmen, or how did they eat honey? Just as a food, or did they put it on
Yeah.
things?
Oh, that's great. No, I think they just chew it right off the honeycomb. The
Wow.
So yeah, they probably do put it on things, but there's not a lot of complicated food prep. So yeah, I think that you get your hands on it, you get a chunk of it in your mouth, and you just start chewing it and spitting out the wax.
They didn't get stung.
What's that?
They
Oh,
didn't.
they did. In other words, this was generally a job of the men, because you better, you're a hero if you bring home a bunch of honey. And they use fire to smoke them out of there, just the way a modern beekeeper does. And they steal the honey. And yeah, but it's worth the fight, because that's super rich calories and a very important source of calories for ancient humans.
Well, what I learned today is never eat a dry carbohydrate when a wet carbohydrate will do.
That's beautiful, I think.
The
That's
new way to
it.
phrase it. It was so much fun, Dr. Lau. These were great questions and great answers, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
Very good. Great, everybody. I'll see y'all soon.
Thanks, and thank you all for watching. Come back